There's a lot of journalistic license in that. When he talked about things like spiders and things, I tell you what, there were none of them, right? They hate them more than we do. Australians can deal with that sort of stuff. They can't deal with it. They don't like it. But if they're occupied, they're not there. If they're unoccupied, they are there. Right? They are there. So that was a couple of things that they told us. That working in the tunnel told us. Now that was Coochie Tunnels #1. That was Coochie. It was destroyed. Right? Then 12 months later, they destroyed the next one because they rebuilt it. And then again, 12 months later, they destroyed another one. There were 7 Coochie tunnels altogether, and the one that you've been down is #6, right? #7 is the one that's closest to, oh, well, it might have been #7, because there's 2 Coochie tunnels you can go to when you go back to Saigon. And they, after 1973, when everyone withdrew, they built another one, which was much closer to Saigon, because they said that, you know, the truce said that North Vietnamese were not going to take over Saigon, but they did, and of course that was the new Coochie Tunnel, and that's the one very political, that one. But if you go to #6 is good. That was the one that was standing at the end of the war. I have written about all this sort of stuff, and there's a book called No Need for Heroes. I've got 7 or 8 books. Most of them have been published. www.calm.com.au. That's a site that if you're interested in things like tours to Vietnam, or which I take every year, and the books, it's all there. Let me tell you this story about Sapper Barnett. The abbreviation for Sapper is SPR, right? Sapper. And Sapper is the rank of Sapper. Sapper is like private. You with me? Once a week they were allowed to go to a bar and go out and get half a day off. The Australians, they got hold of this little bar that was in Benoit. When they were in this bar, it was their bar, Australian bar. You know, that was the way it was. Right? Well, this particular day, Americans came in there, and the Americans were making a real fuss and a noise, and you know, all of this. There was a lot of jealousy on about this, and of course the owners of the bar wanted to get the Americans out because they were breaking up the furniture and all this sort of thing, and our lads were up the other end. The owners of the bar, they called the American MPs, and so the American MPs arrived, and they got hold of all the Americans and they threw them out, right? But then they started on the Australians, and they said, no, even the owners of the bar didn't get, you can't take us, we didn't do anything, you know. But of course they're half pie-eyed, and so they got very, very aggro against the American MPs, and the MPs got angrier and angrier, and one of them pulled out his big baton, and he's about 6 foot 4. He said, "What are you going to do with that, you big bastard?" You know, this sort of thing. And then it was on, right? It was on. It was like a riot. Some of the guys turned over one of the vehicles outside, you know, all this sort of thing. Anyway, they called for reinforcements, and our guys, there were half a dozen of them, were all taken off to the brig. Right, so when they were taken off, in handcuffs, all this sort of thing, one of the soldiers, Sapper Barnett, he said, and he puts on this real toffee voice, "This is the disgusting way you are treating me." He says, "Fancy treating me like this. You don't even know who I am." And they said to him, "Well, who are you?" And he puts on this voice. It's amazing that this guy did this, you know. And he said, "Look at this." He said, "I am SPR Barnett." Well, what's SPR mean? He said, "Special Privileged Rank Barnett." You know, they let him go. Well, you can imagine what the other soldiers did, the other Aussies did. Anyway, they were in a lot of trouble after all of that, but that was what Barnett did. It was just amazing. Oh, it's amazing. I was going to have a 10-minute break, but he cuts me down. So, do you want a 5-minute break? Yeah. I had an hour and a half, so I'm going to 11:15, all right?
I think we carry on because then we'll break for tea at 11:15, guys.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
All set? Okay. I forgot. Okay, so on to mental toughness or resilience. Mental toughness can be developed. It can be used deliberately. It is synonymous to resilience or inner strength, mental toughness. So what are we talking about here? From a military training perspective, which I believe is equally applicable to any corporate training, I quote, individual resilience can be built, maintained, and strengthened when viewed as an enduring concept and acquired through regular training. The mental, physical, emotional, and behavioural ability to face and cope with adversity, adapt to change, recover, learn, and grow from setbacks. That would be an American definition of it. That would be American military definition of it. So I will refer to mental toughness from now on. And I wish to open you to the idea that it is possible to use mental toughness in a conscious, self-directed and deliberate way. You know, some famous examples of mental toughness, I'm sure many of you have heard about. Here's one that I'll read and quote a couple of. Viktor Frankl. Now, Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, described the process of inner strength. He was a Holocaust victim. He was imprisoned in Germany. Many Holocaust victims were shot, gassed, and otherwise murdered violently. For these people, any will to survive was transcended by the physical violence of their deaths. It is also true that many of those who died in the Holocaust died of sickness, deprivation, and exposure. Of the people who were not actually murdered, and ones who had goals, the ones who had goals, who had family, they knew they had to survive for, and those who had a great purpose tended to be the ones who withstood enormous difficulties and survived. Those who were not obeying some great purpose, those who were not gripped by the need to achieve an important goal, soon found no meaning in the daily struggle for life. They gave up psychologically and eventually died. Be aware of some of the key words here. You know? Great purpose, important goals, and meaningful living. Here's another one, Nelson Mandela. Now, he was born in a small South African village and received Western education as a lawyer. Mandela became a key figure of the American National Congress. I'm sure you know that. A political party that sought to unite all Africans and regain their rights and freedoms. He participated in boycotts and all sorts of stuff. Now, you know, he was sentenced to 27 years, right? And he was released age 72. And mainly he was released because of world outcry. You know, as President of South Africa, he established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the TRC, which was a court-like body assembled in South Africa after the abolition of apartheid. Here's Truth and Reconciliation. The words of Marianne Williamson's poem were immortalised when used by Mandela in his 1994 inauguration speech. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And of course there's more. I recommend you to Google it. His huge contribution was the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And here, how he went forward was with forgiveness. Forgiveness. Given the people who came forward, who carried out the acts of barbarism that they did. Closer to a military story, one of my own soldiers, I want to tell you about a guy in my own troop, three-field troop. Now, I never found this out until back in here in Australia, that this particular guy was claustrophobic. Right? You see, I never forced guys down the tunnels. Never forced guys. They were volunteers all the time. Okay, this guy, Sanderson, Doug Sanderson, he was a lance corporal. And he was out with his number 2, and his number 2 got sick and had to be evacuated and came back to camp. So he stayed out there by himself. And normally we work in pairs, I told you that. An enemy soldier was hit, wounded, with a rifle, and went down a tunnel, escaped. The soldiers had found the tunnel, and then of course all looked to Doug, right, to say, well, hey, it's your job to go and get him, right? So, what Doug did was he physically went down the tunnel and he used a tear gas grenade, put on his stuff, went down the tunnel and he brought out that enemy without killing him, and he brought out his rifle. Now, how did he do that? You know, that's what I was made of. I mean, I knew about that stuff in Vietnam, but how did he do it if he's claustrophobic? You know, he pictured and imagined. This is much more like the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years. He pictured and imagined that he was on top of the ground, that there was plenty of air, that there was plenty of open space, and he was feeding that into his mind as he turned around and went down the tunnel. And he was telling himself all the time that I can breathe easily, everything's fine, there's plenty of space, everything's good. And this is what he was doing. His mental process to be able to take him down the tunnel. Now I teach that now, and I didn't know about it, what he was doing then. And I didn't find this out until a few years ago. Amazing. Amazing. This concept of inner strength is not new. Paul Thomas, in his book Psychofeedback, right, about the founding father Coué. Now, Emile Coué, he was a French pharmacist who in 1870 was starting to become fascinated with the power of the mind. Now, Coué actually established hospitals in France, right? And during the Great War, he came to America in the year just at the turn of the century, 1900, and he was drummed out of America talking about the power of the mind and how you can actually use your own mind to be able to work with healing and all this sort of thing. And he was actually told to get out of America. You know, he was like a witch, you know, that sort of thing. Anyway, he went back to France, established a hospital, and he was famous for what he actually taught patients to do, saying that they will be able to use their own mind, and he taught them how to do that, to be able to help with their own healing. I mean, you've all heard about being positive and all that sort of thing. That's only a little bit of it. There's guided imagery, visualization, mental stimulation, all sorts of stuff that you can actually do with that. So it's not new, right? This stuff's been around for a long time. You can learn mental toughness deliberately. My definition is this. Inner strength is that deep quality of our mind and spirit that enables us to create opportunities in life or rise above adversity. I'm saying you don't have to go through it to rise above it. You just tap into it. It is an inherent part of our creation or existence as beings, and it allows us to rise above adversity if and when it strikes. I know that each one of you have had challenges. And if you start thinking back to your challenges, even in your work, your life, your whatever it is you do on a daily basis, if you think back in your life, you've had challenges. And I want you to think of how you overcame these challenges. What did you do? Because you did it, and I'm sure you did it. I'm sure you've done it. I want you to think about how you got through those challenges that you had. Working in groups of 3, so we've got 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, okay? Working in groups of 3, share with each other about a recent situation where you had to draw on extra reserves of mental toughness. Perhaps in a situation that you've been torn between selling or negotiating, or team achievement, or even personal life interfering, and challenges that you may have had within your personal life and how it affects your work. So reflect on how you overcame that challenge. Just take a few minutes and physically do that.